Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a former Boeing 737 pilot, and welcome to part 2 of the system differences videos between the Boeing 737 NG and the 737 MAX. In this video we are going to talk about the flight control differences, and there are quite a lot of them, including the famous MCAS system. However, before we start, a quick note that this video is not a comparison between the iFly and the PMDG 737s, but much rather refers to the real differences between the real aircraft and is based upon the training that I received when transitioning from the 737-800 to the 737 MAX. Now, the changes to the flight controls include, amongst others, a new fly-by-wire spoiler system, which helps to reduce weight and add enhanced functionalities, and amongst others it includes maneuver load alleviation, landing attitude modifier, emergency descent speed brakes, and the elevator jam landing assist system, and some speed brake logic changes. But let's start with a couple of basics. On the 737NG, the spoiler system was a conventional one. On the MAX, however, you now have the system fly-by-wire driven, which is quite a difference in how the speed brake lever actually feels when using it. You will not really notice that in the simulator, of course, but rest assured that those changes are there. So, in general, on the 737 MAX, the fly-by-wire spoilers are controlled by the Spoiler Control Electronic Unit. The SCE unit translates signals from the speed brake lever position sensor and the first officer's control wheel position sensors and other airplane air data input to electrically control each flight's spoiler hydraulic power control units to achieve the desired roll and or drag. The hydraulic pressure to the ground spoiler power control unit is controlled by the ground spoiler control module GSCM. And the GSCM is commanded by a logic in the SCE, which uses air and ground data and electrically sends speed brake lever position. When on the ground, the GSCM extends the ground spoilers to the commanded position by the speed brake lever. Now, on top of the new system, we also have a new light located on the flight control panel on the overhead, and that is the spoilers light located right down here. Now, this did not exist on the 737NG, and when it illuminates, it is activated by a signal from the spoiler control electronic unit and indicates a spoiler system fault. Now, the spoilers have been enhanced with a couple of new features, so let's quickly go over them. We're going to start with the maneuver load alleviation, and that is quite similar to the load alleviation systems found on the 737NG, which however was not really that popular, and to be honest I'm not 100% sure if the PMDG one actually has it installed. In general, what the maneuver load alleviation does is if the speed brakes are extended at higher gross weights, the MLA decreases the structural loads by partially retracting the speed brakes as needed. The MLA is commanded through the SCE and will function when the airplane is experiencing a load factor greater than 1.3 Gs or less than 0.3 Gs. When the MLA is activated, the speed brake lever will not move in response to the spoiler inputs, but when MLA is no longer needed, the speed brakes are simply automatically going to return to the position commanded by the speed brake lever. Therefore, the system is basically not really noticeable to the flight crew. Another system that is not noticeable to the flight crew, but that is most interesting, is the landing attitude modifier. And this is a really interesting system, so pay attention now. The landing attitude modifier system performs two functions. Firstly, it applies when the flaps are in the 30 or 40 position. The landing attitude modifier symmetrically deploys the flight spoilers on approach to increase the pitch angle in order to maintain nose landing gear contact margins equivalent to the 737-800. The amount of spoiler deflection is based on the approach speed, and deflection begins at approximately 10 knots above VREF, with the maximum LAM deflection occurring at 20 knots above VREF. So the second function deploys flight spoilers symmetrically when the flaps are in the 15 through 30 position and the thrust levers are near idle. This generates additional drag to allow the 737 MAX to both capture and maintain a glide path like that of the 737-800. The speed brake lever does not move during landing attitude modifier operations, but some buffeting may occur. So to summarize this, the 737 MAX, due to the higher idle and a couple of aerodynamic efficiency increases, would normally approach with the nose at a significantly lower angle than the 737 MAX, than the 737 NG, and since it has the larger nose landing gear, the nose gear might just touch down much earlier than it does on the NG. Also, the aircraft would have much worse characteristics intercepting an ILS. In order to mitigate against both of these, to give you a similar pitching behavior, respectively a similar nose wheel clearance on the ground, and to make the aircraft feel the same as the NG, you are automatically going to get spoiler deflection when you are on the approach, in order to match what the 737 NG would behave like. So if you're recording your favorite approach in the simulator, you're going to the outside view and you see a slight speed brake extension. That is the landing attitude modifier in action, and that is actually completely expected behavior of the aircraft. Now let's move on to the next speed brake function, and that is the emergency descent speed brake, or EDS. So to increase the aircraft's descent rate during a high altitude loss of pressurization event in the 737 MAX, it is equipped with the so-called emergency descent speed brake system. The system is armed when the airplane is above 30,000 feet and the cabin altitude warning is active. The EDS increases the descent rate by raising the speed brakes to a higher than normal position when the crew moves the speed brake lever to the flight detent position as part of the emergency descent procedure. The EDS is deactivated when the flight crew stows the speed brake lever or when the cabin altitude warning is no longer active. So, quite a cool system, isn't it? Next up, let's talk about a change to the stabilizer trim cutout switches. And you see we're slowly moving towards the trim system. I'm sure you've all come for the MCAS and we will definitely be talking about it. But let's first of all talk about the stabilizer trim system. You can see that the step trim cutout switches have been changed from the main electric and autopilot switches that you had on the 737 NG to simply a primary and a backup cutout switch that you have on the 737 MAX. And if you turn the primary switch to the cutout position, it deactivates the main electric and autopilot trim operation, while if you move the backup switch to the cutoff position, it does exactly the same. It deactivates the main electric and autopilot trim operations. So basically, this system simply is going to cut off the trim, but you have two switches because it just can be that important. This is also the so-called MCAS cutout switch. If you move these two to the cutout positions, MCAS is completely disabled and can no longer cause any conflicts. Not that it would anyway, Boeing has fixed that stuff, but I know that many pilots are very much interested in that. The general usage of the switches remains the same between the 737 NG and the 737 MAX. So, let's go ahead and have a look at a couple of further changes to the speed brake system. And that is the speed brakes extended light that we can find on the on the main panel over here. So, speed brake extended. Now, in the 737 MAX, this system has been enhanced in order to illuminate not only on the conditions of the NG, and if we just revise those, on the 737 NG, the speed brake extended light will illuminate in flight when the speed brake lever is beyond the armed position and either of the following is true. The flaps are extended more than 10 degrees or the radio altitude is less than 800 feet. And the new logic has been added to the 737 MAX to include these two conditions as well, but also when the thrust levers are at approximately go-around thrust for 3 seconds or above idle for 15 seconds. So this light now tells you that in case where the speed brakes should be retracted, like a go-around for example, or when you are using thrust against the speed brake, this light is going to come up to remind you that you need to retract your speed brakes. Another speed brake logic change from the MCAS is evident if the flight crew inadvertently moves the speed brake lever beyond the flight detent position. In this case, the SCE unit should prevent spoiler extension beyond the in-flight position. However, from personal experience, this did happen to me accidentally, because I used the same force on the speed brake lever that I was used to from the 800. But this lever, due to being fly-by-wire and electrically driven, needs a lot less force. I accidentally moved it right beyond the flight detent into the up position, and let's just call it like that. The airplane moved in a way that I'm fairly sure it is not supposed to. So this feature exists in theory. In practice, I cannot confirm its operation. So, last but not least, in terms of speed brakes, let's move to the elevator jam landing assist function. And that is a new switch that you can find located on the overhead panel right up here, the elevator jam landing assist. Now, the function pretty much does what the name suggests. So, when you have jammed or restricted flight controls, then it may be really difficult to land the aircraft. On the 737 MAX, a new system has been implemented to help. So if your elevator is jammed, then you would normally just have to live with the rest of the controls available. But on the MAX, Boeing has been smart, for once. Not the same developers as the MCAS, I can tell you. So, the elevator jam landing assist is a function of the spoiler control electronics unit, which provides pilots with a means of increasing or decreasing descent rates during approach and landing through the use of the flight spoilers in the event of a jammed pitch control. So located on the aft overhead panel, just above the flight control panel, you will find the additional flight control switch and lights called elevator jam landing assist switch and assist on light, which is that light that you have over here. Now, when the system is active, if you are pushing your control column forward in order to increase your rate of descent, the spoilers are going to extend to a higher position, while if you pull aft in order to decrease your descent rate, the spoilers are going to retract. And this basically means that your aircraft is going to aid you in controlling your descent rate through the spoilers. And this is what the elevator jam landing assist system does. Alright, let's move to what you all have been waiting for. The speed trim system, respectively the MCAS system, which is a function of the speed trim system. So MCAS stands for Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, and was implemented on the 737 MAX to comply with regulatory certification requirements for control column forces at high angles of attack. Compared to the 737NG, the 737 MAX aircraft has a larger diameter engine which is located further forward on the wing. This contributed to minor changes in the aerodynamic pitch characteristics at high angles of attack and with the flaps up. This resulted in control column forces that did not consistently increase as a function of angle of attack. The MCAS function was added to the 737 MAX, which helps ensure certifiable control column forces. In the event that MCAS becomes inoperative, Boeing has conducted extensive flight testing to validate that the aircraft is safe and controllable in all areas of the certified flight envelope. So let's go ahead and have a more detailed look into the speed trim system and the MCAS system. On the 737NG and the 737 MAX, speed stability augmentation is functionally equivalent and is provided by the speed trim system. On the 737 MAX, the speed stability augmentation is provided by the MCAS function in the speed trim system. The speed trim system only operates when the autopilot is not engaged. The speed trim function returns the airplane to a trimmed airspeed by commanding the stabilizer in a direction opposite to the airspeed change. This increases control column forces to encourage the airplane to return to the trimmed airspeed. As the airplane returns to its trimmed airspeed, the stabilizer trim inputs are reversed. Speed trim function speed is dependent on the flap position. With the flaps extended, the speed trim function operates at a high rate, and with the flaps in the up position, it operates at a low rate. The STS only operates with the autopilot not engaged. On both the 737NG and 737 MAX, the speed trim function contains a high angle of attack mode that is used to provide increased stabilizer commands at elevated angles of attack. As angle of attack increases towards the stick shaker, the speed trim function transitions to a high AOA mode to command additional nose-down stabilizer trim to increase control column forces to prevent a stall. The AOA input is used only to transition in and out of high AOA mode. This has no effect on the amount of stabilizer commanded. On the 737NG, higher AOA mode is available in all flap configurations. On the MAX, the mode is available in all flap configurations, but is primarily used with the flaps extended. So that much about our basic speed trim system. Now let's go ahead and move on to the maneuvering characteristics augmentation system. On the 737 MAX, pitch stability augmentation is provided, but the maneuvering characteristics augmentation system, MCAS, and is a function of the speed trim system. The purpose of MCAS is to increase control column forces by commanding nose-down stabilizer trim when at elevated angle of attacks. Stabilizer trim input in the nose-down direction are added incrementally if AOA continues to increase above the threshold AOA. As angle of attack is reduced below the threshold, the commanded nose-down stabilizer trim is reversed by the MCAS function nose-up trim. If for some reason the AOA is increased again above the threshold AOA, the MCAS function becomes active and commands stabilizer trim inputs in the nose-down direction. Now, MCAS stabilizer trim commands are based on angle of attack input and Mach number. MCAS will activate under the following conditions: autopilot not engaged, flaps up, angle of attack above a certain threshold, Mach number below 0.84, and at least 10 seconds after takeoff. In order to manage the MCAS function logic, the flight control computers feature the following three primary MCAS logic enhancements: AOA comparison, maximum command limit, and a single MCAS activation only. These enhancements provide functionality to prevent erroneous MCAS functions from activation and ensure the elevator provides sufficient pitch maneuvering capability to counteract nose-down stabilizer commanded by the MCAS function. And that's about as easy as it gets. So let's have a look into a couple of the technical details of the MCAS. So, the flight control computers use a corrected angle of attack value to activate the MCAS function. The logic uses both AOA vanes and filters out small differences between the vanes and provides a single corrected value to the speed trim system. This provides additional signal process to protect against erroneous angle of attack indications. On the 737 MAX, if the left and right AOA sensors disagree by 5.5 degrees or more with the flaps up, the amber speed trim fail light is going to illuminate and the speed trim system is inoperative for the remainder of the flight. The MCAS function also contains logic to limit the amount of nose-down stabilizer trim movement in order to preserve elevator authority for pitch control. This ensures the elevator always provides sufficient pitch maneuvering capability. When the MCAS function activates, a snapshot of the trim position is taken. A nose-down limit is then established from the snapshot position. The command limit logic inhibits the speed trim system when the computed nose-down stabilizer trim limit is reached within 5 minutes following MCAS activation, or before the autopilot has been engaged for 1 continuous minute following MCAS activation. If either of these criteria is met and the maximum command limit is reached, the speed trim fail light illuminates and the speed trim system is inoperative for the remainder of the flight. After 5 minutes or after the autopilot has been engaged for 1 continuous minute, whichever occurs first, the maximum command limit logic, what a hard word to say, is reset. The nose down limit can be reached by any nose down stabilizer trim movement, such as manual trim, main electric trim, autopilot trim, speed trim function, or MCAS activation. The flight control computer logic ensures that the MCAS function will only activate once per elevated angle of attack event. Each time the airplane exceeds the threshold AOA, the maximum amount of commanded nose down stabilizer trim is 2.5 units at low Mach or 0.65 units at high Mach numbers. As angle of attack increases above the threshold angle of attack, the nose down stabilizer can be incrementally added until the angle of attack is reduced below the threshold angle of attack. Although nose down stabilizer trim can be commanded incrementally, the sum of all increments will not exceed the maximum amount stated above. The angle of attack must transition from below threshold angle of attack to above threshold angle of attack after transitioning from flaps extended to flaps up in order to activate. This reduces the chances for two AOA vanes that are constantly erroneously high from leading to MCAS function activation. Now here's an operational consideration. The MCAS system should not be active during normal flight, as the autopilot is engaged for the majority of line operations. For unforeseen circumstances such as certain system failures or flight maneuvers that would require manual flight where the flaps are up, the crew should avoid rapid and sudden flight control inputs. During MCAS activation, it may appear that the aircraft is developing an out-of-trim condition, and this is MCAS operating correctly. Regardless of the reason for the out-of-trim condition, crews should always be aware and without delay attempt to get the aircraft back into a trimmed state. If uncommanded stabilizer trim movement occurs continuously or in a manner not appropriate for flight conditions, action the runaway stabilizer non-normal checklist. Alright, that much about the basics of the MCAS. I do hope that you have all been able to follow. Now, last but not least, let's go ahead and have a look at the speed trim fail light, which has slightly been changed on the 737 MAX compared to the 737NG. So the speed trim fail light is the light located up here on the flight control panel. And if this illuminates amber on the 737 MAX, it is going to indicate a failure of the speed trim system or MCAS function. If one function fails, the other function is inhibited. It can also indicate a failure of a single flight control computer channel when the master caution recall is activated, and the light extinguishes again when the master caution system is reset. On the 737 MAX, if one speed trim system fails, both functions, speed trim and MCAS function, are inoperative for the remainder of the flight. Similarly, if the left and right AOA sensors disagree by 5.5 degrees or more with the flaps up, or if the maximum command limit is reached, the speed trim fail light illuminates and the speed trim system is inoperative for the remainder of the flight. Crews should refer to the speed trim fail non-normal checklist in that condition. So last but not least, on the 737NG and the 737 MAX, the main electric stabilizer trim switches on the control wheel can be used to override the speed trim system. So that's the switches we have over here. And if we command a trim, you can see that that these switches are the primary switches used for that. So, additionally, the 737NG and MAX trim switches have micro switches at the base of the control column. So down here on the base of the control column there are micro switches installed that prevent an accidental trim movement into the wrong direction. So these are designed to stop operation of the main electric autopilot and speed trim function when the control column movement opposes the trim direction. In addition to this design, the 737 MAX also has a software that enables control column function for redundancy in case of a failure of the control column actuated stabilizer trim cutout switches. The software control column cutout function stops operation of the autopilot trim and speed trim function when control column movement opposes the trim direction. Let's do a very small example here. If I'm pulling up on the control column, I should not be able to trim down. Okay, that much about it. Likewise, if I'm pushing down, I should not be able to trim up. Which, interestingly enough, on the iFly seems to work, even though it jumps back to neutral, but that's a little bug involved in the iFly over here. If you want to override this automatic inhibit, then you've got the stabilizer trim switch down here, which you can set to the override position, and then you should be able to trim into any direction with the control column moved into the opposite direction. So, for both the control column actuated stabilizer trim cutout switches and the software column cutout function on the 737 MAX, aft control column movement does not stop the MCAS nose down trim commands. However, forward control column movement interrupts MCAS nose up trim commands. Well guys, and that's it. That's the changes to the flight control systems, including MCAS, on the Boeing 737 MAX. I hope you found this one interesting, and if you're interested in a demo where I'm actually going to show MCAS operation off, be sure to put that in the comments below, and I might think about creating a video like this. In the meantime though, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you found this one interesting. Be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and as always, if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I see you all again on the next one.